Okay, so we're on chapter 8 of George Fox's journal. If somebody wanted to grab one off of the shelf, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll just read quotes that I find as interesting. So, are you able to hear us okay, Stephen, or do I need to change some settings?
No, I can hear you. I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay. Alright. We'll go ahead and get started since you're on Mexico City time and I don't want you to have to stay on too long. So this first quote comes towards the beginning, and this is a letter that he wrote to all the professors of Christianity. And where Jesus Christ is now spiritually come and made manifest, such as are Christians in outward profession only, have the same hard hearts inwardly now, as the Jews had then, and cast stones at him where he is risen. The Jews answered, For thy good works we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, in that thou, being a man, makest thyself God. Jesus answered them, Is it not written in your law, I say, ye are gods, and Scripture cannot be broken. So this chapter, Fox defends the practices of the Quakers, and most of it is speaking about the opposition of hireling priests, and then in the last half is basically his defending of people that quake, which is kind of funny. So I'm not going to talk much about the quaking because I was having computer troubles today and didn't get any quotes out of that part, but it is interesting and we can discuss it. I just don't have quotes on the screen for that. But most of this chapter is copies of letters that he wrote to either officials or to general people like the professing Christians. So in like manner, all in the nature of those Jews now, whose religion stands in notions, stir up rulers and ignorant people, and incense them against Jesus Christ, to stone all with one consent, in whom he is risen. So who is George speaking out against in that? In those first two quotes?
What time period is he writing this particular?
Good question. Let's just go back to the front. 1654 to 1655. So it's Cromwell.
It's near the end of Cromwell.
Yeah.
Sounds like he's talking about the priests when he comes to a town.
So what he's getting at is you're not speaking truth. You're just working people up into a frenzy so that they will react to anything that you say, and inciting them against everything, really. And so he's speaking to the priests or the leaders of the community, and what's he speaking out against?
Inciting violence.
Inciting violence, just thinking that you have the answer just because you are in control or something like that.
Well, just before that, you'd had the major purges of the cathedrals. I know Ireland, Christchurch Cathedral was 53 or 54, so that was like one of the last last ones to happen. And then where they basically went in and ripped out all the reliquaries, everything. And then there was a short revival, and then after that, after Cromwell, and then another clampdown again. So they weren't just, they were pretty much going, the Puritans were pretty much really fermenting attacks on anybody that they wanted to point at and yell at. Not just Quakers, but even anyone that they considered too high church.
Yeah, they did violence against the Church of England proper. And because they were too celebratory and popish, and then they would incite, they weren't very good to the Presbyterians either at first, so it's, they didn't play nice at all. So how does stirring up the rulers cause problems for those within society? Welcome, Taylor. We have a new person on Zoom, just so you know. Stephen is joining us from Mexico City, so that's fun.
David has a work thing tonight, so.
Oh, that stinks. So these rulers or these priests are stirring up. Fox is great at explaining all this, ignorant people. And inciting them against those that are professing any type of faith that's different than whoever, their own groups. So that causes problems within a society because it becomes a mob rule sort of thing. We had when I was still working at Target, when the riots broke out, same sort of thing. Leaders got people worked up and to a frenzy, and then Target was very, very sensitive to anything related to race. So, and made my job in security unbearable. So it can cause major shifts for good reasons or for bad. So it's, as long as we have to think through some of the things is what Fox is trying to encourage. But then the last question I asked on that section is, was George also stirring up the rulers and the ignorant people and the masses? He very much was. So he may speak out against it, but he is participating in it as much as everyone else. So we're in chapter 8 if you wanted to. And I didn't put page numbers because I read an ebook, but this is probably the first 2 or 3 pages of chapter 8. The proud one's head is aloft, fearing he should lose his pride and his crown. The priests incense the ignorant people for fear their trade should go down, and the professors show forth what is in them, being full of rage, which proves that Jesus Christ, the substance, is not there, but a stony heart to stone the precious, where it is risen. The carnal mind feeds upon the outward letter, earth feeds upon earth, and the vineyard is not dressed. but is full of briars and nettles, and ravenous beasts, swine and dogs, wolves and lions, and all venomous creatures lodge in that habitation. That house is not swept. These are the persecutors of the just, enemies of the truth, and of Christ, blasphemers of God and his truth. These call upon God with their lips, but their hearts are far from him. These feed on lies, priests and people. These incense the people and stir up envy, for it begets its own, one like itself. These are as the waves of the sea, foaming out of their own shame. He does have a way with words, if I can read them. So what he's talking about there is the hypocrisy often found within communities. We get excited about issues around us, and people speak for and against these issues, and we get worked up into a frenzy. So, what is the problem with this practice? See it every 4 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen it happen here, you see it happen all kinds of places. You basically quickly devolve into us against them. We're right, they're wrong. No, you're wrong, I'm right. Thing going on, and no one wants to sit down and find the middle ground.
Well, people are acting on emotion rather than knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, they're reacting to what was said and how it was said instead of what actually was going on. So it becomes pretty if you're on Facebook, how hard is it to stop yourself from making a comment on a post that you just see is totally wrong, and you're trying to explain it to them, but nobody's listening because they all have this emotional response. So the problem is that it closes our ears and our hearts. It hardens, like you said, it hardens our hearts, and we become just beasts.
Maybe I read it differently, but somebody was talking about the hierarchy, saying this is the way it needs to be.
Yeah, he does speak some of that, but he starts off in that quote to talk about the pride and the crown. So a lot of these people speak out against, especially the Quakers, because they run the risk of losing their position. So if the Quakers are right and all these priests are wrong, then they're going to lose their job. So there is a little bit of pride. There's a little bit of, I'm better because of the position that I hold, but it's also, if you have that position, you're supposed to be doing something with it, not working people up into a frenzy, but you're supposed to be the substance of Christ to the people.
Well, a little historic context. Just before this, before Cromwell took over, you had James fifth and first? I don't know if you're familiar with that designation. He was James the Fifth of Scotland and James the First of England. And the consequential Jameses were known as together the fifth and first, the sixth and second, the seventh and third, but who was coming out of a background where he was pretty much taught that kings ruled by divine right, and you didn't need any parliament or anything like that. And he really instilled it into Charles the First. And the execution of Charles is what created the English Civil War, which eventually brought Cromwell into power. So they've seen a whole almost 50 years of conflicts where it's, I'm right, do what I say because I'm king. And many of them felt that after Cromwell secured his power and the war was over, he also said, do this because I'm right, I'm the Lord Protector of England. He wouldn't call himself king because that would have got his head chopped off. So they've seen a whole series of this sequencing up to this in their lifetime.
And we can see that even in our own society, where we're so polarized on a lot of things that we can't work together because it might say that I'm over here instead of over here. And I don't care because I just mean. So how, when half-truths are used to justify actions, often justice is lost to the quest for power. So Cromwell is saying, I'm not the king, but I'm Lord Protector, and I have the same divine right as a king. It's a half-truth. He's there to protect and keep the government going, but he's not king. And yeah, the king may have the position of power, but that doesn't mean he's infallible. So, and as we've read with some of the other instances of the priests talking about Fox, you know, they called him a witch. He was in two places at once. Oh, that's not true. Yeah, you didn't kill him, but that doesn't mean that he's a witch. And that sort of thing. So the half-truths, when we use those, if we're not wanting to, if we're hiding something, then it becomes this where you have to keep it hidden. And if it's exposed, then everything that you built yourself around falls down. And that's kind of what he's speaking out against, because you build yourself up to this place. Your crown is up here, and you're the leader, but if somebody actually challenges that structure, then everything's crashing down. But to them that fear his name, the secrets of the Lord are made manifest. The treasures of wisdom are open, and the fullness of knowledge. For thou, O Lord, dost make thyself manifest to thy children. So, what's he mean by the word secrets?
Shut the door.
The true meanings, the true will of what God wants.
Yeah. Is he being Gnostic? Like the secret knowledge that only certain people get? Not really. If you look at the rest, the treasures of the wisdom are open. So he's saying that the secret's secret because a lot of people aren't seeking it, but it's available. And if you're seeking God, then you'll have the full knowledge given to you. But it's just weird that he would use the secret knowledge, and a lot of Friends traditions kind of go along in that train of thought, where they can become Gnostic or New Age-ish, where we're trying to find the secrets of the universe instead of just seeking the Spirit and living with each other. We're seeking that special something. So, and this is kind of where that comes from as well. Because it does use words like secret, that just, what he means is unknown. Unless you want to find it. Pride is flown up into their head, and hath so lifted them up, that they snuff up like wild asses, like Ephraim, they feed upon men, and are like wild heifers, who feed upon the mountains. Pride hath puffed up every one of them. They are out of the fear of God, men and women, young and old, one puffs up another. They must be in fashion of the world, else they are not in esteem, else they shall not be respected, if they have not gold or silver upon their backs, or if their hair is not powdered. But if he have store of ribbons hanging around his waist, and at his knees, and in his hat of divers colors, red, white, and black, or yellow, or his hair be powdered, then he is a brave man, then he is accepted. He is no Quaker, because he has ribbons on his back, and front, and knees, and his hair is powdered. This is the array of the world, but is not this from the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, or the pride of life. Boy, I did good on that PowerPoint. Here's all the questions I'm going to ask. So, first one, of what is Fox speaking out against here?
Seems like applied to today. Some of the televangelists.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely good.
That gentleman that's, I think it was Elaine, Benny something.
Didn't you know?
Benny,
Benny
Hahn or something like that. On the big drive of the shops, these pictures of the recipe stars for the 60 pies. And very flashy. And to me, that's not where your ministry should be. Yeah, to me, he's speaking very loud and clear about these ministers. It's all fashion and looks and no substance.
It sounds to me like he's speaking out less against appearance and more against wanting to be accepted by society, so you do all of the earthly things that society wants you to do, and that's the outward appearance.
England starting, well, earlier times, but basically after Henry and Elizabeth I, the last Henry and Elizabeth I, there was a marked increase in the outlandishness of costume. The over the hill, if you ever seen the portraits of either Henry or Elizabeth or other members of the aristocracy from that time period, and you start seeing, the piled up hair, the rough collars that come out past their shoulders, extravagant use of lace, extravagant use of things. And that continued on. The Puritans were trying to fight it, but it wasn't really happening. If you've ever seen a picture of Cromwell, in the early days, the Puritans are what we think of as that was actually after this, but we think of our pilgrims and their plain stuff. If you see you've seen any pictures of Cromwell, he's wearing very ornate armor quite often, poofy sleeves, very continental type of outfits, a little more sedate than you would see on the continent, but still, obviously, the best materials that money could get. And he's wearing fur and he's, stuff like that. So, even under the Puritans' rule in England and the parliamentary rule of England, the ones in charge started, adding more and more lace, more and more ribbons, like he's talking about there, to their outfits to show their wealth and that they belong to the upper class. And that occurs all through history.
Yeah.
Kind of start with Louis XIV and kind of spread from there to some in France. They kind of start with Louis XIV and kind of spread out.
I'm trying to remember the dates for.
He's the 15th century, so he
Yeah.
he was the really extravagant, crazy.
Was he the one that met Henry at the Club of Gold? My French history's not all that.
Right, yeah, but he was super obsessed with.
But, I mean, the same thing was happening all over.
I feel like we can blame France, probably.
Yeah,
Might as well.
everybody else does. Why did the war start in Europe? France. Yeah, it's France's fault.
And today, blame Germany or
Who's lost the most wars in Europe? France. Actually, no.
Best losing.
But he's talking about the showiness of society. The keeping up with the Joneses is the term today, I guess, or my mother's generation, where you have to get the latest thing to stay up to date in society. So how many people do you know have to get the newest iPhone as soon as it comes out? They're standing in line to get it. If they need it or not, or if they can afford it or not, they're still in line getting it because that's where they draw their identity from.
One of my sister-in-laws is now on this plan that as soon as a new iPhone comes out, they send it to her. It's like, okay.
And there's not necessarily anything wrong, it's just, if that's where you're putting your identity and everything about you is focused on that, it can cause problems. If you needed the newest thing for work or something like that, then you have a reason for it. And if you don't need it, then you don't necessarily get it. But if it's that vanity of wanting to make the appearance that everything is going great. The great British comedy Keeping Up with Appearances or whatever, on BBC, I love that show because I like British comedy, but she's always wanting to look like she's better than she is. And anything that...
Mrs. Bouquet?
Yeah. Yeah, Bouquet. Or Bucket.
Their last name is Bucket, but she pronounces it Bouquet.
So why does he speak so strongly about this?
Ultimately, it goes back to scripture, where they had the poor man sit in the back and the better looking people sit up front.
Yeah.
So to me, it speaks strongly of that.
It's dividing people up and putting extra value on some, and even if they deserve it or not, and that can deter us from spiritual growth, because if you're only going to listen to somebody that looks like they have it all together, do they necessarily have it all together? Not really. But they make it look like they're rich or powerful, but they could be so far into debt that, if it rains too much, they could probably lose everything. And how can that produce injustice within a society?
Outward appearances.
Anyone who doesn't keep up can't keep up or treated as second class citizens.
Yeah. So if you're brought in front of a judge somewhere, if you have a collar on, you might get treated better than somebody that doesn't. They may throw out the case instead of throwing you in jail. It's speaking of the collars, some of the collars, the ruffles and all that would take, it's a full-time job just to iron it into position. So they would have servants hired just to maintain their collars. So it's kind of crazy.
Since Tracy was in here, I'll throw in a modern reference, probably a little older than he would. Thinking of the song Signs
Yeah.
from 1970. Kind of the same concept there.
Yeah. So Fox again speaks of the charge of, or the, I don't know what I wrote here. He was professors made against him along with being a witch. I don't even know what I think I forgot to delete a thing. We won't worry about that. So this one's a letter to the friends, not just to professors in general. Actually, it's to the rulers and the kings and the popes is what it says. Friends, ye heads and rulers, kings and nobles of all sorts, be not bitter nor hasty in persecuting the lambs of Christ, neither turn yourself against the visitation of God and his tender love and mercies from on high, who sent to visit you, lest the Lord's hand, arm, and power take hold swiftly upon you, which is now stretched over the world. It is turned against kings, and shall turn wise men backward, and will bring their crowns to dust, and lay them low, and level with the earth. The Lord will be king, who gives crowns to whomever obeys his will. You that profess Christ and do not love your enemies, but on the contrary shut up and imprison those who are his friends. These are marks that you are out of his life and do not love Christ, who do not the things he commands. The day of the Lord's wrath is kindling, and his fire is going forth to burn up the wicked, which will leave neither root nor branch. They that have lost their habitation with God are out of the Spirit that gave forth the Scriptures, and from the light that Jesus Christ hath enlightened them withal, and so from the true foundation. Sorry, this is a long quote, but I liked it. So, therefore, be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slower to persecute. For the Lord is bringing his people to himself, from all the world's ways to Christ the way, and from all the world's churches to the church which is in God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, and from all the world's teachers to teach his people himself by his Spirit, from all the world's images into the image of himself, and from their likeness into his own likeness, and from all the world's crosses of stone or wood into his power, which is the cross of Christ. For all these things, or all these images, crosses, and likenesses, are among them that the apostatized from the image of God, the power of God, the cross of Christ, which now fathoms the world, and is throwing down that which is contrary to it, with which power of God never changes. So he seems pretty adamant about the activities of the rulers. You don't hear talk like that on TV, do you? From religious leaders. What does Fox's example show us about our interaction with authorities? How should we interact with those that are ruling us? And how should rulers interact with those that are subject to them? I like the part, be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slower to persecute.
Listen and understand one another.
Yeah.
You're saying that to the people who call him a witch.
Yeah, he probably has.
Well, I was wondering.
No, this is
That quote, I was just trying to.
this was a letter written to, is mainly written to the people outside of England, leaders outside of England. And they carried, he sent them to like France and all of that. And to the Pope.
Did the Pope write it back?
I don't know if the Pope ever did write back, but popes have talked to friends quite a bit, though. Especially Francis. He talked to quite a few Quakers. In fact, one of the first people that he invited to the office was a professor from George Fox University. He's like the third or fourth person that outside the Catholic Church proper that got invited in. And he said he really liked his book.
George Fawcett.
No, the professor's book. He's one of the leading experts on the Gospel of John.
And to be clear, this is a university professor, not a
Not a
George Fox
professor.
professor.
Right, yeah. So why does Fox speak so boldly when he's talking about these religious, or these national leaders actually, not just religious leaders, but he's talking to the kings and the nobles over the people.
That's just his personality. He speaks boldly to everyone.
He's not afraid, for one thing. I mean, he's already been in jail plenty of times, so he doesn't really care what they do to him. But he's showing them that you're quickly reacting to things, and you're not slowing down to actually hear them out. And as you're doing that, you're throwing out the profession of your faith, because you're treating those that are trying to live out their faith as if they're wrong, and you're killing them, you're throwing them in prison because of professions of faith that are different than your own. What does that make you? So does this give us direction in how we should speak about what we observe in our own society?
I think you
I
have
have a
to
question.
say.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt somebody.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I'm a little late to this group, and so I haven't read the previous quotes in the journal, but my question is quote A the exception to the journal? Because so far we've seen 3 letters, and the literacy rate would have been low in England this time. So this is a select audience. Is this approach of speaking to priests and people who can afford ribbons and finery, and then here popes and princes, is that the exception to George Fox's ministry or mission, or I don't know what the right word would be? Or should we understand that these letters would have also been read out?
His intention was there to be read out in the meetings. So, and Fox was considered illiterate, even though he wrote this huge journal and many letters all over the place. He is largely considered illiterate because he wasn't educated in the schools of England. So, but he was writing these letters to the friends, to the various professors, and sending them out so that they could be read to the congregations, into the meetings. So I don't know what the literacy rate was at that time, but I know in Cromwell's England they had a they wanted higher literacy because that's shortly after the printing press, and the Puritans really wanted you to know your Bible.
In this time period, the tests for literacy in the context of what Jared is saying, of being educated, you went to university, you learned Greek, you learned Latin. There were, I'm currently doing readings on the time right before this, actually, the time of Charles I, actually, in Elizabeth, Charles I, as far as Ireland goes. And one of the things that you find is you're introduced as an educated person, and the person you were talking to would be speaking to you in English and then suddenly start questioning you about the writings of Julius Caesar, and he asks the questions in Latin. And then he may transfer and ask you about the writings of Aristotle and switch into Greek. And if you could follow him and make the switches with him, then obviously then you were a literate and educated person. Fox couldn't do that. He probably did not know Latin very well, if at all, and he most certainly probably didn't know Greek. And that was retaining clear up into the time of the American Revolution. You were well educated if you could speak Latin or Greek and read Latin and Greek, if you could read the various base writings. They used to teach Western Civ, and that was one of the cornerstones of it. So he was literate as far as being in English, but he was not considered literate by any of the academic standards or even priestly standards or pastors or well-educated noblemen.
But as society as a whole, they may not have been able to read well, but the letters were intended, kind of like with Paul's epistles and stuff like that, read them to the meeting, share them, and that sort of thing. So, and that's why he preserved them in his journal, as well as there's books of his letters as well.
Fox had a whole group of followers that he was corresponding with at the same time that he quite probably sent his letters to, and they would have individual meetings around the country or in other countries at the time when they got a letter from Fox or one of the other major leaders of the Quaker or the Friends movement, they would undoubtedly, it was rare enough and hard enough to get, that they would read it to the other. If nothing else, then a little bit of vanity on their own. Look, George Fox wrote to me, and now I'm going to read you the letter he wrote me. It gave them their credibility, and to a certain extent.
So this next section comes from a letter written to the Protector. That's how he titles it, to the Protector. And this is a title that Cromwell gave to himself after he took rule over England. So, did the apostles cast men into prison for tithes, as your ministers do? As instance, Ralph Hollingworth, priest of Billingham, for petty tithes not exceeding 6 shillings, has cast into Lincoln prison a poor thatcher named Thomas Bromby, where he has been for 38 weeks, and still remains a prisoner. And the priest petitioned the judge that the poor man might not labor in the city to get a little money towards his maintenance in prison. Is this a good Savior amongst you, that are in commission to choose ministers? Is this glad tidings to cast them into prison, a man that is not his hearer, because he could not put into his mouth? Can such as are in the fear of God and in his wisdom own such things? So he's beginning this discussion on hireling priests, but we have to kind of get the context of the history surrounding there, and David could probably speak much better into this than I could, but in the 17th century, most of Europe had state-sponsored churches, and the people were legally required to pay their tithe. And it was from the tithes that the priests were paid, and the priests would often seek positions in certain areas based on the financial benefit that was offered. So if you're in a well-to-do area, then you're going to try to get into that well-to-do area because you're guaranteed a certain amount based on the tithe. And at times the priests didn't even serve in the church that they were a priest over. They just took the money and did their own thing. Not all of them, but some of them. Go ahead, David.
Well, in the readings I'm doing, it's a particular person that is a professor at Trinity College, Dublin. And the interesting term at the time was he has acquired a living. Which means he's been given a church and a set amount of land around that church, which is actually all the way down by Waterford, which today is about a 2.5-hour drive by freeway. But he's a professor and living on the grounds at Trinity College. And he had hired a curate, a poor, low-level priest, to be at the church on his living and perform services for the people that lived on his land and worked the land for him. And technically he was required by the Church of Ireland to at least 3 times a year travel to there and preach. That was, otherwise he had all the income coming in off the land that the people that lived on it were generating it more or less as sharecroppers. So that's the kind of arrangement that they're talking about now.
Yeah. So the parish did not contribute. The priests that were mainly focused on the financial benefit of the placement would use the legal system to ensure their status. So if you didn't pay your tithe, then you were thrown into prison. And this put undue burden on the people as well as they had a record then. So why would Fox be concerned with this practice?
They were regularly throwing Quakers in jail for not paying their
Yeah, he didn't like paying the tithes, so I guess this idea of not paying your taxes goes deep in our Quaker roots. But yeah.
I think it's just Christ-like.
Yeah.
Like we're supposed to forgive each other, not throw each other in jail for not giving tithes. It's like complete opposite of what the gospel teaches us. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's that.
I feel like Fox would have been more accepting of the tithes if he felt like the priests were actually contributing to the welfare of society. When
Yeah.
I think he interprets them as just taking the money and doing whatever.
Yeah.
Well, he tried to join them. Like he was like, yeah, let's see what you guys are all about. I'll see if I like you. Like when he was seeking as a young person, but he's like, yeah, I don't like that.
So is it proper to give a tithe to the church?
It's proper to be generous.
Yeah, we're gonna step on toes here a little bit. So yeah, you should want to help your community. That's what the tithe is about. It's not a tax. If you're getting the feeling that it's an obligation, then maybe you should question some things. But if your community is encouraging you to give as you can and to help take care of this place that you love, that's something different. And this system was putting an undue burden on really the poorest of the people, because they could either pay the tithe or eat. Which is more important?
Interesting side note, I looked it up to be sure that I got my date right. Imprisonment for debts in England ended 1869. It lasted that long, that if you had sufficient debts, they could file out and the bailiffs could grab you and throw you in prison until the debt was paid.
So here's the next fun question about this section. Should pastors receive compensation for their work? This is a hot debate among Quakers.
Absolutely.
If you want to insult a Quaker pastor, call him a hireling. You're just in this for the money, as if any church is wealthy enough to make it worth their while. So,
Work on commission. The more you do for the community, the more you get.
it also brings into question, how should compensation be determined?
You want another random weird piece of information from my
Absolutely.
readings? The Sextant Verger for Christ Church Cathedral, Dublin. He was paid technically 5 shillings a year. This is roughly 1640. He also rang the bells. He was paid by the city of Dublin to ring a bell in the morning, that's the start of workday, and the end of the workday. The city of Dublin paid him 20 shillings a year to do that. If you had a funeral at the cathedral and you wanted the bells rung, you would pay him, depending on how complex the ringing you wanted done and how long you wanted done, you would pay anywhere from 5 to 20 shillings for a single service. On top of that, he and his family had a place to live on the precincts of Christchurch. He lived in a little hut that was a little building next to the church. Made sure the church was locked up at night and unlocked in the morning. And being at the church and living in the precincts, he was in the liberty of the cathedral, so he paid no taxes to the city of Dublin. The sheriff of the county could not arrest him as long as he stayed in the church liberty. And no one could throw him in jail for debt. as long as he stayed in the liberties of the cathedral.
Well, the job isn't done
The bell ringer by the end of,
Pretty good.
well, it turned out that, if you look at the financials involved, the records of one particular one that I was looking at, he died relatively wealthy. His son inherited about 45 pounds, which at that point would be the kind of money a large landholder holding several hundred or thousand acres of land would have as income for a year. So, interesting things going on there.
So would it be okay if I called the police if you aren't putting enough on the plate?
Sure.
Not if our offering is paying for his broken or salary.
So can you just picture how ridiculous that sounds today? Yet that's how they were living then. I mean, it just seems odd.
It's kind of like a government job, and like they're, collecting taxes to pay a person's salary to do a service that was deemed necessary.
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
I mean,
It makes sense to do that. We do that today. If you don't pay your taxes today, you get in big trouble.
Yeah.
Maybe not as you're not gonna starve, because I don't know, maybe you become homeless even.
Yeah, you're not likely to go to jail, but yeah, you definitely lose your income.
Yeah. Yeah, they garnish your wages.
Right.
So they garnish your wages for child support. Even if you pay it, they garnish your wages for it. So,
Yeah, I would be upset if it was like, I had to pay those taxes for something I didn't believe in. Like, maybe someone else's church, like, sorry, that church doesn't count that you're going to, that's a Quaker church. You need to pay your taxes to your local, Presbyterian church.
but if the priest wasn't even showing up, and somebody in the community was keeping it going, yet you had to pay that instead of paying the person that was actually doing the work, it sets a bad taste in your mouth. It's just, labor relations, you have similar types of feelings. CEOs getting all the money, the people that are doing the work aren't, and it gives a bad taste. And then you have, politicians that are making a whole lot of money and getting lots of benefits that aren't being given to the people that they represent as well. It doesn't make sense.
Question of procedure, when people would tithe, was it the priests themselves that would basically take that money and decide how it was distributed to themselves, the church, and the community?
Depends on the type of church. If you're talking about there are multiple different ones. There were churches that were for the village, in which case, I'm not sure about at this time that a church that small would have a verger or a sexton, who would be the kind of treasure steward for it. Currently in England, the church has kind of like our board of elders, and there's a sexton that is the kind of the caretaker of the church. This would be the easy way to apply it. Now, if you're talking about, like I was talking about the guy at Christ Church Cathedral, the head of that was the dean of the cathedral. That's what made it a cathedral, was the way that it was organized.
Well, I was thinking more of the churches that George Fox would go to in the hands that he visits.
In most cases, there was either a priest or a curate there, which is basically a priest working for an absentee person who has the living for that area. And his salary was quite often based on the amount of money that was coming out of the area. But at that particular point in time, the church had lands attached to it that were providing income for the owner or the priest of record. There's probably the best way to put it. And he would in turn tie the amount of money he was getting out of it to how much he was paying the person to be there in his place the rest of the year, except when his required number of visits a year.
Yeah, they would have to pay a certain amount to the hierarchy.
And then a portion would go to the bishop over that area. And
Yeah. So it depends on how that community was set up, but they did have a great deal of power. So they could often twist your arm to do what they wanted you to do. So here it goes on. Christ, when he sent forth his ministers, bid them give freely, as they had received freely, and into what city or town soever they came, inquire who were worthy, and there abide. And what they set before you, he said that eat. And when these came back again to Christ, and he asked them if they wanted anything, they said no. They did not go to a town and call the people together to know how much they might have by the year, as these are in the apostasy do. I can't read. As these that are in the apostasy do now. The ox's mouth must not be muzzled that treads out the corn. But see if the corn be trodden out in you, and the wheat be in the garner. This is from a lover of your souls, and one that desires your eternal good. So all this was written to Cromwell, and he's basically saying, why are you letting the priests determine salaries when they should be doing it freely? Does that mean they're not compensated?
Is this a fair analogy on Fox's part? Because Christ's ministers would have been these itinerant individuals, as opposed to these churches in England that would have been institutions that would have required more financial support, right? They would have required more money than, say, someone wandering alone.
Right.
Just for
Right. So, but what he's getting at is, why are you becoming the priest or the pastor? And are you doing it because it's an easy way to get a living and you don't have to do any work, or are you going because you're being called by God to minister to people? And that's, and as you brought up, Christ's apostles were itinerant preachers, so they're just traveling around. But they would stay in one place for as long as they would have them. So if that house decided that they could no longer afford to keep the apostle, and they tell them and they leave. So yeah, it's a community-based thing, but it's also, are you going because the income's going to be good, or are you going because it's what you feel God is calling you to do?
I feel like it kind of addresses that too, like on that next part where he talks about the ox.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, maybe I'm understanding that maybe not quite right, but to me it's saying like, if you do a good job, they'll take care of you, because, like, right, because he's saying, like, if you're trotting the corn in their hearts, which means you're being a good pastor to them, you're helping them grow or whatever, then they're gonna have plenty of wheat in their barns for you or whatever.
Yes.
Whatever it's their barns, I don't know, but like, to me, it says, like, they'll pay up if you're being a good pastor.
Yeah. So when he talks about when Christ sent out the 12, he sent them out without anything. So he sent them with no coin purse, just the clothes on their back and a walking stick. And then they came back to Jesus and he asked them, "Did you want anything? Like, were you taken care of while you were away, or are you starving to death?" And they answered, "Yeah, we were taken care of. The hospitality of the people that we went to was sufficient." And that's what Fox is getting at is, let's let the community take care of itself. Why are we putting rules on what they're going to do? Just let the community take care of themselves. Let the pastor take care of the community, how he or, in Fox's case, he or she feels called. And we'll see if you don't have to demand necessarily a salary, because people are going to take care of each other. So that's what I get out of it. But yes, they are an institution, so there is a need to take care of the building, and we should take care of our building. Our steward's here, so the steward is saying, yes, take care of the building. But it is one of those things where, you know, what are we putting as most important? Are we putting all of the money towards the pastor and the building is getting neglected, or the people in the community are being neglected, or are we taking care of the community as a whole?
Jordan, what got so much out of this? Things haven't changed. For 4,000 years.
People are still people.
When Moses set up a priesthood, there were certain things put aside for the work of the priest. And then later on, I can't remember the priest. It was allowing his sons to take the best of the meat.
Oh yeah, Aaron's sons. It wasn't even that long after it was set up.
They were taking the best of everything. And as time went on, it got, you know, the rabbis were very well dressed, very well educated. And in the early Christian church, I'm thinking more Catholic church, they kept the parishioners ignorant. That's why Mass was in Latin. And so, when people asked questions, the priests thought they were too ignorant to understand. And at one time, you know, they had curtains in front of the altar because they didn't think people were smart enough to realize what was going on. In my lifetime, you know, they switched Latin to English so people could understand it. So I see the parallels, but they haven't changed it.
That's an excellent question, and I don't have the answer. Because no, we haven't changed all that much.
Because I'm reading this book and I thought, we're still the same.
So what would the Council of Fox be to the churches in regard to pastor compensation? What would his answer be, just according to that?
The opposite of you get what you pay for.
You know, make sure that they have a place to stay, make sure they're well fed. You know, how would that translate today?
It's really kind of just a disagreement on the level of organization that's necessary, right, to have things function. Because I think you have a lot of, like, reading the journal, I mean, I get sometimes a sense of Fox's peace, but the actual events of the journal are like total chaos at all times almost.
Yeah.
Like, I'm here with these people, I'm here with 1,000 completely different people, I'm debating this person, I'm debating just random people showing up here, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think for most people today, would not be comfortable, probably most people then, would not be comfortable with like that level of absolute chaos in their faith life or faith community, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they would like to have the same pastor, but maybe they can't always support that pastor, you know, like, okay, times are tough, but then some people are gonna shirk, you know?
Yeah.
And so then your pastor leaves. I mean, the system, I don't know much about the Church of England, but like the Catholic system, right, there's always going to be a priest in every geographic area, regardless of what's happening. So you have that kind of baseline level of security provided by the institution, saying, you know, you're always going to at least have a priest. It might not be a good priest, but you will have a priest, and you will have a building that you go to worship, you know? Whereas in the Fox system, you're putting more faith in God to provide those things without really an organized church on earth to kind of make things happen, right? A lot of stuff is sort of left up
To the people in the community.
right.
Yeah, Fox has a great deal of faith in humanity.
Yeah, I think that's, I would agree with that,
We know where he was getting his money from, right? Necessarily.
He doesn't really say, but somebody was feeding him.
I'm gonna sell potions.
Who is selling essential oil.
There we go. Jared, join this.
So does Fox say that there should or shouldn't be paid ministers?
I think he said there should be. Like he qualified his sharing of look what the disciples were doing with the auction at the from his food or whatever.
He's basically saying if you're called to minister, then the community should take care of you. And if the community isn't, then go somewhere else. So.
But that's different than saying it should be like a salaried position, though.
Right.
And I feel like, do you think you'd be surprised that the Friends Church became like an institution itself? Like with.
I think you'd probably be surprised with how it's turned out.
And would he be like a little bit upset that he's not like a cool rebel anymore?
Probably that's probably what upset him the most is that we're not as rebellious as we used to be.
Right.
But I think he would probably speak out against both sides because the unprogrammed side that has gotten so anti-minister that we cannot have any trappings of a minister where they don't even record pastors anymore. He would probably say, well, who's teaching you? Why are you, where are you getting? Yes, the Spirit's supposed to teach you, but there's also supposed to be people that are encouraging.
An illustration of that is the other Friends meeting in town, which is an unprogrammed Friends, has swung multiple times over the year from very Christ-centered to very New Age, to very Christ-centered, to very New Age, to Eastern. It has done that swing multiple times in my lifetime.
Sounds chaotic.
And it's all dependent on who they select as the clerk of the meeting. Currently, the clerk of the meeting is married to a former Methodist pastor who actually wasn't a pastor, he was a chaplain at a prison. So they're currently very Christ-centered. If it switches to somebody else, they move elsewhere, they could easily swing in an entirely different direction. So.
The way you said that sounded like we're the only two meetings in the area?
Yeah, there's only 2 Friends meetings in Kansas City.
In Kansas City, there's a meeting in Eudora, Kansas. There's a meeting up between Tonganoxie and McLeod. There's a meeting south that essentially right now is 2 people.
Closed officially.
Is officially closed now. There's a meeting in Emporia. We're very spread out here. When I was young, there was a meeting in Kansas City, Kansas. But that one died in the 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, I just didn't realize it was that sparse.
Yeah, and most of those are Evangelical Friends, but there is one, I think they're Iowa Conservative Conference, so this is where Fox traveled during this chapter. That's the first half. And remember, he started up around Birmingham and Nottingham, and then he goes on down. So he's covering basically.
Is that as the crow flies?
Well, actually,
This is the actual. These are current roads. So he.
It just seems like a lot for a normal human to do. Yeah.
So
well, at one time, he was all the way up at the very top. When was trying to remember the People's House? It's up in Northumbria.
Yeah.
Between Newcastle and the East Coast,
Yeah.
almost to the East Coast, straight across.
Yeah, he's been he basically what it shows here is that
Quakers should do a George Fox walk.
they do have tours. So what it shows is he basically covered all of England. So I mean, if you notice, he's mostly on the he kind of stays around the coastal regions, but he goes all the way to whatever this one is, Cranbrook,
which is right on the border of what's considered to be Cornwall.
Yeah, so he's in England proper. He covers pretty much all.
Did he ever extend it all into Cornwall or Wales?
I can't remember. Maybe in chapter 9.
Maybe in chapter 9. Okay.
But he does get up into Scotland a little bit, not too much. Mainly just the lowlands between, borderlands, which is where my ancestors came from. Was the borderlands of Scotland, England area, and then. But he does actually get to America eventually. So, but it's just that's where he says he traveled in that year. That's my word, makes me tired just thinking about it. Because that's on foot or by horse. So, like it says there, that last branch there, 123 hours of solid walking. So, it's just
359 miles.
Yeah.
I got
A bit short of walking across Kansas.
So, and he did multiple. That's just part of it. So, but this is something that he says after the meeting. Many Baptists and ranchers came privately, reasoning and discoursing. I can't read. But the Lord's power came over them. The ranchers pleaded that God made the devil. I denied it and told them I was come into the power of God, the seed of Christ, which was before the devil was, and bruised the head of him. and he became a devil by going out of truth, and so became a murderer and a destroyer. So I showed them that God did not make the devil, for God is a God of truth, and he made all things good, and blessed them. But God did not bless the devil, and the devil was bad, and was a liar and a murderer from the beginning, and spoke of him and not himself, and not from God. And so the truth stopped them, and bound them, and came over all the highest notions of the nation, and confounded them. He confounds me. So, what did they mean when they claimed that God made the devil?
Was it like Timothy kind of thing?
I don't know what the context of that, them saying that is. Like, what did he just say before that? Like, why are they using that as an argument?
There's not a lot of context. I don't think.
There really isn't a lot of context.
I would think they might assume that just because God created all living things.
Mm-hmm.
So that includes the devil.
Yeah, so it's that argument that God created evil as well as good. And so it gets into the theological debates. So what does Fox mean to say when he says God didn't, but it became the devil?
He's arguing that the being that was the devil chose to be that way.
Yeah. This is actually an argument that people make still today. Literally, Saturday, I made a comment on a video about this very argument. And somebody quoted the scripture that was quoted by Fox here, saying that, you know, God made the devil, he is the devil from the beginning. And it just, that's why I highlighted it, is because it was so interesting that even we're still talking about the same things today. So he's saying that, one side's saying that God created the devil, so God is responsible for the evil, that it's all predestined. And then Fox is saying, no, God didn't create the devil. He created a being that had the capacity to choose for themselves. And that's what we commonly call Arminianism now. So he's saying that it's a spectrum. So if God made the devil, then God created evil, is what he's saying. If God made all things good, but gave us the free will to choose what to do, this free will extends to all the created beings, including the spiritual beings. Then God created what became the devil as good, and it became the devil out of choice. And that's something that a lot of people have trouble thinking about. But why does that matter?
Good question.
Well, I think it. Oh, sorry. No, you go. You go first.
We don't want people to blame God for evil.
Yeah. That's a lot of it.
That's pretty much what I was going to say too. Like, it's the nature of God. Is God like supremely good, or is he do things that you even wouldn't do?
So how many of us have heard somebody say there can't be a God because there's evil in the world? If God was a good God, he wouldn't allow this.
Why would he destroy his own creation and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff?
So they were wrestling with the same things that we wrestle with today in the 1650s, in the 1000s and all of that. So it comes to this, why it matters is, do we have a choice or do we not? And that's where the Calvinism, the points of Calvinism are speaking of. And he says that he is talking to Baptists, which we don't think of Baptists as being Calvinists, but they're all different branches of thoughts. So they're discussing, are we predestined to be in heaven or hell? Do we have a choice in that matter, or is it just already determined? So we just are subject to our fate. And Fox is saying that we're created good, but we need to work with God. We can choose evil. It's not quite Calvinism, and it's not quite Arminianism. It's not quite Augustinian theology, and it's not quite Pelagian. So we talked a little bit about that earlier on, and it's universalist to some degree, but not completely. He even says that the devil had a choice. And that's important to me, that God created all beings with the choice to choose what to do. So, anyway, there's a lot of stuff that I just don't think I want to keep us here that long, but he goes on to say that he was wrongfully accused of breaking into a house, and oddly enough, they took him in for a trial. The judge heard his case, got upset that he didn't take his hat off, which is typical, and Fox was saying, I've been to see the protector and he didn't care about my hat. Why are you causing such a fuss over this? And then eventually the judge determined that he was not guilty, yet he still had to struggle with the idea of if he should send him to jail or not. I just found that very interesting. He found him innocent, but should I send you to jail?
Anyway, just because you didn't take your hat off.
Yeah.
I mean, kid, my child, you didn't break this thing, but, I really didn't like the way you were talking to me, so you're still getting punished. So.
It sounds like contempt of court to me.
Yeah.
Pick up your bag.
It's difficult to imagine a legal system that would act like that.
I think if a judge told you to take off your hat and you said no, you might. Depending on, what I mean, a judge still has a lot of authority in the courtroom.
Have you ever seen Judge Judy?
Yeah. But he was, the way that he explained it in the journal was that he is still going to send them to jail for breaking into the house.
Oh, okay.
Even though he accepted the testimony, and it's like, yeah, there's no way you could have been at the house because you were at this meeting, I can't remember how far. It's a long walk away. So,
Well, if the accusers might be a threat to the judge might want to send him to jail anyway just to appease the accusers.
So it's just one of those things where, kind of like with Jesus, Pilate he whipped him, 39 lashes, and then brought him back out. Is this good enough? And then, is this, I had the trial, he didn't do it. Is that good enough? Or do you want to, maybe I do need to send him to jail. It's not justice, it's appeasement. And it just seems weird. So, and then he also starts talking then about the quaking, and most of that comes from how do you respond to God?
We're not skipping over that though, are we?
We are, because my computer died when I was working on it, and we can revisit it if we need to. But was there anything else that those of you that have read it have found interesting? So for the quaking part, he basically goes through the entire Bible and pulls out every verse that talks about trembling and puts it in, and it's just funny because he's like, why does this even matter? Is basically what he's saying. People respond different ways when the presence of God is around them. David danced. Some people fell on their
Naked.
face. So, you know, so we quake. How can you control yourself in the presence of God? So you're just responding. And that's basically what he's getting at. They're trying to use it as a way to discredit the people. And he's like, it's nothing. Scripture is full of instances. And it really wasn't. He kind of wanted to push it off to the side. And it's like, there's something more important here than quaking.
He's arguing against their labeling.
Yeah.
Quaker, okay.
Yeah, so it's, but then they eventually took the name. Because it's like, okay, if you're going to continue to use this as a derogatory term, yeah, we're Quakers, big deal. So they made what was meant for harm, they turned it to good, and went on. So,
And that's how we got Quaker Oats.
yeah, and eventually and then people outside of Quakerism wanted what the Quakers had, so they stole the name. And now Quaker Oats sues churches because they have
Oats.
They actually sued Quaker Oaks meeting because they said it was copyright infringement, and the judge was like, seriously, they threw it out.
They
But
can find oatmeal over Quaker Oats.
so, but the meeting's like, you can do whatever you want, but this meeting's been here for an extended amount of time, and it was there longer than Quaker Oats existed, so it's like they didn't care one way or the other, but they weren't going to change their name.
Jared or David, do you remember when they had that beer, Quaker beer? And there was a big stink about that. And the guy that had the brewery had no idea Quakers were still alive. And there were a ton of letters. Do you remember that?
No, this is new to me.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
All these letters were written, and what was that, 20 years ago? 25?
It's been a little longer, but yeah.
Does he still like the beer?
I think
He changed the name, I
Yeah.
think,
But
because
he thought all Quakers were dead.
We thought we were Shakers, not Quakers.
most Quaker groups are they oppose the use of alcohol.
But they have their own alcohol.
Yeah,
Like,
in America, those
distillery.
are abstaining. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
that's
Quaker
good.
whiskey as well
Yeah.
in England.
They weren't just brewing, they were distilling.
Yeah, they're very good at their crafts. So, but
Temperance.
The U.S. branches were big movers in both abolition and prohibition movements. If you ever want a really interesting read, it's a book, if I remember correctly, it's called Alcoholic Nation, and it's about how much was actually drank in the colonial and early federal period of the, I mean, it's amazing what was consumed. Well, even in this time period, most water wasn't all that safe to drink. And if it had been boiled and alcohol added to it, it was much less likely to make you sick.
yeah, if you really look at how much we did drink alcohol in colonial times and early American history, there really was a problem. What we see in Russia today, that's basically what America was prior to Prohibition. So Prohibition did actually improve things. not that I agree with it 100%, but there was a real social problem that they had to address. So anyway, next week is finding answers together. So if you have a question, ask. If not, we'll continue on with the Bible Project's Sermon on the Mount and Ten Commandments that we did last time. So,
Stephen, are you still with us?
I'm here. I gather the next book is book 9, and there'll be a future meeting on that.
yeah, it'll be in 4 weeks.
Okay.
So next month.
I was curious if you were part of a Quaker meeting in Mexico City.
I'm not. I don't have any affiliations. I'm just curious, and and so I think, as far as I know, at one time there was a meeting here. My understanding is that it's online, but I'm not certain about that.
Okay.
If you are interested, Friends World Committee has a website that you can find all the Quaker meetings in the world on that. So it's FWCC. So if you are interested, you can look at that. If not, there's several online. So, but we're very grateful that you came in and joined us, and hopefully you found something of use. So,
I did. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you letting me join you.
yeah.
Nice to meet you.
As far as we going forward, the same code is what I'm going to keep everything going in the future. So Tuesdays at 7, just pop on if you want to join us. So
I will. Thank you. Thank you very much.
yep. So at that, I'll just go ahead and say you sign off, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Jared.
Take care so long.
You know, Jared, I was thinking, like, I think George Fox would be happy with how pastors are paid today. Because, I mean, like, you're not, like, you don't demand it, and we all kind of vote on it. We all decide what we did. That's, like, kind of what he was saying. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, it's, like, almost exactly what he was saying should
Yeah,
be.
none of us are really in a position to supply him with grain and meat and milk and eggs anymore in this part of the world. Anyway.
It's the key to the
You guys are what do you guys have?
Well,
Right?
I don't think he was saying like they should only get food and housing. Like that was just like that's just like.
Well, at one time, Willow Creek had a parsonage.
Yeah, I know. I was like, Jared, I was like, man, I'd probably lived in that thing if I was you.
Well, the thing of it is the pastor at the time talked to and they were complaining about having to pay to maintain the parsonage. So basically, they sold it at a very reasonable price to the pastor at the time, who raised his family in it, and then when he left the Kansas City area, he sold it, and that became part of eventually his retirement fund. Because
That house was a mess.
it
It
was,
was taken care of by the church, had huge cracks in the basement, and when I had somebody come out to look at it, and here's the former city inspector, he said if he'd come out as inspector, he could do the property. But it was, the windows had holes in them around the frames, but we didn't have enough money to really fix it up. And, you know, this was part of the parsonage at one time.
Yeah.
when it, yeah,
Church started, this half was the parsonage.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we compliment, right? Just add a second quarter.
Oh, yeah.
You can probably do that in your spare time.
so to answer your question here, we don't talk about much. I don't make a big deal about it.
About money.
Yeah. I come from Fox's point of view. As long as I'm able to survive, I'm gonna stay. But if I need more food, if I can't afford to even live, then I have to look elsewhere for a job.
Yeah.
There are times where I couldn't have done this class because I wouldn't be at work. And we had the freedom to do that as friends. But there are other meetings that demand that the pastor be full time, not have a job outside of the church, yet they aren't paying them enough to live off of. So it becomes a very, it can be a bad issue where, but I try not to make it a big deal. So, but I can honestly say if it was not for my wife's dad, we could not stay here because we couldn't afford it. So it's not saying that anything against the church or anything like that. It's just that's the reality of the situation.
Well, in Fox, I'm sure living in a time where most people wouldn't have very insignificant expenses.
No.
I mean, most people would be absolute dirt poor by our standards.
Yeah.
And when everybody knows that poor, and it doesn't seem right. I mean, I'm sure it's not fun, but it would be like now, like you got like health insurance, car insurance, car, I mean, all these things that they would have no equivalent to that. And he's in the middle of this big explosion of converting new people and new, right? So it's like, this is, I can see how as in certain areas, right, congregations get smaller, then how does that work for the pastor when people are giving freely, but there's fewer people giving, and they still have to make, survive, so.
And this was a strange time in England at that time as well. Shortly after that, I think is when the Industrial Revolution really kicked off. And, because of how Fox encouraged people to handle things, Quakers in business became very wealthy because of how they handled their interactions with everybody. And most of the Quakers that did own businesses, lots of people wanted to work for them because they took care of their people, because it was very community oriented. Today, still, where Cadbury's original factory was, the community that he built is a lot of people want to live there because it's a nice area. Because that was part of his pay is if you work for Cadbury, he's going to have a house for you and it's going to have a garden so that you can grow your own stuff.
Well, now I want more Cadbury cream eggs.
Yeah, so, and we didn't celebrate Easter, but we profited off of it. So, but,
I guess the way that a lot of Christmas songs are written by Jewish people.
yeah, and so a lot of the steel industry in England and chocolate industry and a lot of banking was run, a lot of Quakers became very wealthy in those areas because they had to go into business because they couldn't go into law, they couldn't go into, because they weren't allowed in the university, so.
Because they wouldn't take your hats off.
Yeah, because they wouldn't take their hats off. So, and today, now they have to wear a hard hat,
Well,
so it's not a big deal.
To give you an idea, it was